9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is Deep State Radio.
Hello there, and welcome to Deep State Radio. I'm David Rothkopf. I'm your host, as I have been since dinosaurs roamed the earth. And I am joined by some of my other fellow inhabitants of Bedrock. And that includes Rosa Brooks of Georgetown University Law School. How are you, Rosa?
Great, David. The world is doing really well, and I'm so happy to see the world peace is breaking out all over at the UN General Assembly.
Peace is busting out all over, and somebody who surely will see the upside of all of that is the queen of optimism, Kori Schake. How are you doing, Kori?
I'm exceedingly well, thank you, David.
Exceedingly well. It must be a bright and sunny day every day at the American Enterprise Institute.
Naturally.
Yeah, I can just imagine. And somebody who is sunny, provided he's provided with the right refreshments, Ed Luce of the Financial Times. How are you doing, Ed?
So, I just want to get you to clarify that refreshments allusion.
Also, the sunny part.
You mean Diet Coke?
I'm certain that that's what I meant. Weren't you just in the Midwest, Ed? Like, how did you entertain yourself? Weren't you in Ann Arbor? How was that?
That was very good. I was talking to students and faculty, and I always find that refreshing. But I mean, that's election related, and I know that's not what we're going to be.
Do you ever find yourself walking into student groups and thinking, "Oh, I'd better tell them I'm a reporter or something, because otherwise they'll think I'm one of them"? Yeah, because I always think like they'll mistake me for another student.
Exactly. You have to declare. Look, I'm older than you. You might not think it. No, I normally ask.
I hate to bring you back to the planet we are living on, but I was 24 years old the last time I walked into a classroom and people didn't realize I was the teacher. So I think you're kidding yourself.
I am. Sorry, I know this is not the topic of today, but I am teaching at Brown this year. And they keep calling me Professor Luce, and I keep saying, "Look, I'm not Professor." And they keep so call me Ed, and they say, "Yes, Professor Luce." So clearly, they think I look like a brontosaurus or one of David's dinosaurs.
One of my pet dinosaurs. Yeah, no. People. Periodically, someone will stop me in the street, and I can tell where they know me from because they'll say, "Oh, Professor Rothkopf, I was in your class back in the back in the day," and I'll say, "Oh, you're retired now." Anyway, pretty grim. So it's UNGA week. I know that's Rosa's favorite week. She loves UNGA. Everything about UNGA, full of news and excitement. And what have you been following with UNGA, Rosa?
Well, the big news, obviously, such as it is, of the last couple of days were President Biden's farewell speech to UNGA and Vladimir Zelensky's efforts to convince the rest of the world not to forget about Ukraine, and everybody's efforts to pretend that they're going to do something to bring about peace in the Middle East, and a few stray efforts by people in countries such as Sudan to say, hello, things have been really bad here for decades. I don't know if you remember us. We live in Sudan. So all of those things were happening at once. I don't think it can be said that any meaningful progress was made on any of those fronts, although Biden made a very nice speech. Some very nice speeches were made.
Well, that's it for our show this week. I think you've summed it up pretty quickly and done a.
But probably Ed and Kori think meaningful progress was made because they're optimists.
Yeah, I bet even Kori's glittering tiara of optimism cannot find anything of substance in UNGA.
You would be mistaken, David Rothkopf.
Oh,
estimate the glittering jewels in the tiara of optimism I sport.
Well, okay. Surprise us. Surprise us with something meaningful that happened in
With
UNGA.
a glittering jewel.
I think one of the reasons Rosa and many other smart people are so dour about the UN in general and the UN General Assembly in particular is because you expect it to do things that it was never designed or capable of doing. The United Nations cannot produce peace and security. The only time, can anybody think? The only two times I can think of in the entirety of the UN's history where even the Security Council contributed to peace and security was when the Russians foolishly left the room and allowed us to get a consensus for a UN force to protect South Korea after the North Korean invasion in 1950. And the Libya mandate during the Obama administration, which both the Chinese and Russians bitterly complain we double-crossed them on. And so UNGA is useful for two things that I think really do matter. One is it matters for the strongest states in the international order to have to make the case for what they are doing in the world to the generally unimpressed other countries of the world, right? It's an accountability measure that we have to show up and see everybody, mildly clapping at our completely unambitious initiatives for the UN and for our self-aggrandizing justifications for the choices that we make. The second thing that's important about UNGA is we have to sit and listen to our ostensible allies making their case for international support. I mean, the Qataris trashed us on our Israel policy. Most of our friends in the Middle East did. They don't always sound off in that same way when they're just talking to us or when they're talking to us in the CENTCOM headquarters or in our military headquarters in Bahrain. So I actually think it was productive on both of those counts. It was productive to hear the unimpressiveness of a lame duck president who practically, it was like watching a slow motion version of Jeb Bush saying, "Please clap," as Joe Biden described all of his achievements. And second, it was really useful for us to have to hear the sound of jerseys being torn away from our friends in the region and their exasperation at the very Israel policy Joe Biden was defending. How'd I do, David?
Look, that's why you're here. You cheered us up. I all of a sudden believe UNGA is pulsating with value. I was, however, going to turn to Ed. I'm sorry you jumped to Ed in the script here, and talked about the president's remarks because I like it when Ed summarizes his views on Biden's demeanor. How'd you think he did there, Ed?
Look, I don't want to rain too hard on Biden. And Kori, in her optimistic fashion, smuggled that in too well. This was a valedictory address for the wrong occasion and the wrong time. This is no time for valedictory. As Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, laid out in his Secretary General's speech to UNGA this week, the world is in a really bad shape.
I can only imagine that only the listeners to Deep State Radio even know who Antonio Guterres is. And in fact, I believe some of them are such profound nerds they will go out on Halloween as Antonio Gutierrez.
Absolutely, and they will be recognized.
I thought that's what everybody did.
Yeah.
I'm going as Antonio Gutierrez this Halloween, David.
That's kind of like a.
I'm going to go as the Deputy Secretary General myself.
Yeah. Talk about stealth costumes. Yes, and I didn't mean to interrupt because I knew that if you talk for more than 2 minutes, the first minute will be being kind to Biden. The second minute, it will start to wear away. And by the end, you'll say he was nearly comatose. And it was painful to watch him. And if he were running for president at the level of energy he was when he presented this valedictory, we would all be doomed.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to end in that place. So thank you also for robbing me of that line. It's like, should we talk about Shakespeare or something?
Yeah. Well, let us sit upon the ground and tell sad stories of presidents not quite dead.
Well, Jimmy Carter's turning 100 next Tuesday.
And his speech was just as good.
His speech was even better, actually, with a lot more vim. I sort of packed a lot of punches. No, I mean, the silver lining when Biden appears is always that thank God he's not the nominee. I mean,
and thank God he's not Donald Trump. There's that.
And thank God he's not Donald Trump. But this is not the time for valedictories. He's being rolled over by Netanyahu yet again. It has real, non-trivial impact on the next 6 weeks before America votes, and could harm Kamala Harris's chances. So I would like to see Biden sort of step up to the urgency of this situation with the level of diplomacy that he has hitherto been unable to display towards Israel's leader. And that's a deep concern. And that's the dark lining to what he didn't say and didn't signal in his speech.
Well, let me turn to our attorney, our resident attorney here. That's you, Rosa. You can
no. Wait a minute.
You can hit your meter, because I will ask you for some legal advice here. Apparently, according to a report that came out of the State Department concluded that the Israelis were blocking the flow of aid shipment to the Gazans, and according to the law, should have stopped weapons flows to the Gazans. And this was overridden by Tony Blinken and the Biden administration, all of whom we love dearly. Does that sound to you like an error?
Well, so first of all, law professors are fake lawyers, not real lawyers. To be clear. Second of all, why, yes, David, this does seem to me like an error by the Biden administration and by our friend Tony Blinken. Obviously, our own laws do give the president the ability under the Leahy laws and others, other laws restricting military sales, military provision of military assistance of various sorts for human rights reasons. The president does have the ability to override that in the interests of national security, et cetera. So from a strictly U.S. perspective, it's perfectly lawful for the president to say, well, yes, but we're going to do it anyway because of these really important things. But I do think it's a mistake. I think the escalation of the conflict is now spilled over into humanitarian disaster in the West Bank, that's spilled over into Lebanon, the conflict against Hezbollah. The Israelis are now talking about potentially sending ground troops into Lebanon. Obviously, given that we have been saying for what is almost a year now that we want to bring a rapid end to the conflict, that we're very, very concerned about the humanitarian toll, the fact that the conflict just continues to escalate suggests that we are doing something really badly wrong. And one of those things that we are doing wrong, I think, is continuing to provide the level of military support to Israel that we're providing when we know, our own experts have concluded that what is happening most likely amounts to war crimes in this conflict committed by these. And not to say, of course, that Hamas has not also committed war crimes, but Israel's our ally, and there is a little bit of a friends don't let friends drive drunk. We are doing the equivalent of letting a friend drive badly drunk, and they are running over a lot of people in the process.
Yeah, well, they don't have a strategy. They never do. Bibi's not really good at that. Tactically, they've embraced something, Kori, and I know you're a student of these things, and we'll have a Clausewitz comment for me any minute. But they've embraced this de-escalation to get to de-escalation. Pardon me? Is that what you said? Escalation.
De-escalate.
Yeah, escalate, and which our friend Alon Pincus, who's not here, and please, Kori, I know you have delicate sensibilities, so you may want to cover your ears. But he said this is like fucking for virginity. You know, he's a diplomat, so he like couches the terms. It doesn't seem to. We don't seem to be de-escalating, do we? I mean, I'm like the TV is on next to me here, and it says Israel prepares for ground invasion of Lebanon. So,
I agree with your judgment, David. Let me put it differently. You are exactly right, David. I don't see any sign that de-escalation is the point of this escalation. I think escalation is precisely the point of this escalation. What it looks to me like the Israelis are doing is they are trying to reestablish deterrence with Iran. So by destroying Hamas and Hezbollah through a combination of the grinding ground campaign they have ongoing in the West Bank and a different kind of campaign in South Lebanon, which consists of long-range strikes and moonshot espionage operations like the pager attack, like the assassination in downtown Tehran during the Hamas funeral, like the attack, was it in Syria or Lebanon, on the facility that was the start of the Hamas assassinations. I think the Israelis are trying to remind people that part of the warfare spectrum they're really good at. I would be surprised, to be honest, if Israel sends ground forces into southern Lebanon. They look to me pretty stretched with the operations they have on underway. But maybe they're going to be tempted to show that they couldn't do it in the 2006 incursion, but look how much better they've gotten now. But I'd be surprised if they send ground forces into Lebanon, because I think they are achieving the effect that they want, which is brushing Iran back out of the batter's box with the combination of strikes and moonshots.
I love the idea of the Iranian intelligence guy who's assigned to listen to this podcast going, and what is this better's box? By
the way, the best cartoon I have seen, so you probably saw the news rattling around on social media that Hezbollah is pressing Iran to get involved, to widen the war, to direct Iranian participation. And the Iranians not having said yes to that. And the great cartoon that's making its way around shows a swimming pool with one child panicked and sinking while the mom has her hands held out to another child. And the sinking child is Hezbollah, and the child the mom's reaching at, Iran is the mom, and she's reaching out to UNGA appearances. I love that, right? The Iranians want to look at UNGA, and they're leaving Hezbollah to their own devices.
It's beautiful. The image I got was Hezbollah calling Tehran and getting new phone, who dis? Um, Ed, you said that this could be a scenario that could cause problems for Kamala Harris. That seems unfair. How could that happen?
Well, look, I hope that Kori is right and that there's not going to be any ground invasion. And it might be that the Israelis are saying there's a possible ground invasion as part of the rhetorical escalation, which is all. If you believe the escalate to de-escalate rationale, it's about getting Hezbollah, intimidating them to pulling back and standing down. So, if indeed Kori's right, then the damage to Kamala's campaign would be limited. If she's wrong and this continues to escalate up to and including the Israeli Defense Force occupying a strip of southern Lebanon in order to clear Hezbollah from it and to clear most of its rockets from within Israeli range, then you're going to see broader Middle Eastern ramifications, the threat of Iran becoming directly involved, Egypt and Jordan and others taking stronger actions like banning flights, overflights, etc., and oil prices going up. And if oil prices go up, they're going to feed straight into the gas pump prices here in the United States, which will hit the boost, which will undo some of the boost to consumer sentiment that the Fed delivered last week with its half-point rate cut. So that's the sort of primary delivery mechanism to negative delivery mechanism to Kamala Harris from a Middle Eastern war. The secondary one would be that it just adds to this impression of a world on fire, of chaos, resulting from the Biden-Harris years, and will give Trump just easier talking points. I don't believe that's a fair criticism at all, but politics is about mood music, and it just would not be helpful to Kamala Harris. I should add, after all of this, that the chief concern here is for people on the ground, both in Lebanon and Israel, and that I'm just answering your question about its effects on the American election.
Beautifully put. Nicely framed. Rosa, what does Kamala Harris do? I mean, Donald Trump, we know what he's going to do. Oh, anything bad that happens, it's their fault.
It's the Jews' fault.
Yes, it is the Jews, by the way.
Actually, I believe that was his most recent statement. Not that
multiple
policy.
He's said that now multiple times. And in fact, I have an article in Haaretz, if anybody's interested, talking about that. But what Kamala Harris is the vice president. She can't change foreign policy now. The U.S. has very limited ability to influence Israel in any event, apparently. The Israelis seem to be doing what they want. But we are sort of 6 weeks from Election Day, and this could flare up. Is her best responsibility or her best response to deplore it?
Apparently her best response is to deplore it. I mean, I do think she's in a bind. She is still the vice president of the United States. She still works in the Biden administration. She cannot, given that she is not Donald Trump, who ignores all norms, she does care about norms and customs, and she's not going to try to throw Joe Biden under the bus while she's still his vice president. So although there is lots of hypothesizing, occasionally by me as well, that Kamala Harris would have a very different policy towards the Middle East than Joe Biden has had, and that she is more inclined to be serious about being tough with Netanyahu, and that she is more concerned to actually act on the worries about the humanitarian cost of Israel's actions than Biden has been. We can hypothesize about that all we want, but she can't say that right now. She or at least she clearly feels that she cannot say that right now, which puts her in a bind because she's essentially, her hands are tied. I think this is obviously a broader problem for Harris, not just on the Middle East, which is that we still, in terms of her electoral prospects, she can't differentiate herself from Biden except by saying things like, well, I'm sort of a new generation, which is obviously the case, because she is stuck. with Biden's policies, and for reasons both of sort of logic and loyalty, she can't deviate from that. So I don't know. I don't expect that Kamala Harris is going to. I think she's going to be doing a whole lot of deploring, but that is realistically all we can expect from her between now and certainly between now and the election.
Well, you know what else we can expect next week, Kori? And I know you're looking forward to this because the Cardinals are not in the postseason. And you'll have the opportunity.
That was gratuitous, David. You just shot an arrow right in my heart.
I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. But you will get something to make up with it. Sort of two nice Midwestern boys standing up, not sitting. In the past few times this has happened, the vice presidential debates have been seated. But in a bold innovation, Tim Walz and J.D. Vance have decided to stand for their debate, which I find incredibly exciting. And they're going to talk about a lot of issues over which they probably will have very little impact over the next few years. But one of them that J.D. Vance has spoken a lot about is Ukraine. That was also on the agenda at UNGA. It was kind of poignant, much as Biden's valedictory was poignant. Zelensky's speech was kind of like, "Hi, I'm Vladimir. Do you remember me? Do you remember where I'm from? We are having a war. Please don't forget us." And, of course, J.D. Vance's response to that would be, "Forget them." And Trump has said, the reason this war started is America. And so, it's really binary with this election. I'm wondering what your thoughts were on Ukraine this week, and maybe, will, Vance double down on this and thus alienate chunks of voters across the Midwest who care about this, like the Poles and so on.
So I think Ukraine actually had a pretty good UNGA. I thought it was incredibly smart of President Zelensky to go to a munitions factory in Pennsylvania that has provided a lot of the 155 artillery shells that Ukraine has been using. As a reminder, in advance of his speech at UNGA, just how long this war has been going on, and it hit exactly the right note of appreciation, but also desperation by Ukraine about how long the war has been going on, how grateful they are for American and other Western support. And then at UNGA, the emphasis on the both in the General Assembly, but I think he also spoke to the Security Council, offering a peace plan. There's no way the Russians are going to agree to it, and there's no way that there's going to be a negotiated settlement to the war that Russia has imposed on Ukraine. Military force is going to have to solve this problem. Somebody's got to win, and somebody's got to lose the ability to prosecute by military force their political objectives before this can stop. But it's very much in Ukraine's interest for them not to look as though they are unwilling to negotiate an end to the war. So I thought Ukraine more broadly had a good UNGA, even though you're right, David, that it was sort of, hi, remember me? We're still under assault. What was the other part of the question? I'm sorry.
No, I was just, this may come up during the VP debate next week.
The VP debate. I'm sorry, I was stultified by thinking about how bad the Republican candidate for president and his vice presidential pick are. They sound un-American, to be honest. They don't just not sound like conservatives that Ronald Reagan would recognize. It's actually shocking to hear the foreign policy views coming out of a former American president and potential future American president and vice president. my expectation of the debate, in addition to the excitement of them being forced to stand rather than sit comfortably when they talk about things people are probably not going to care about, I have to say, I expect that the Harris campaign has not unspooled all of the sail they are going to get from not seeming weird and mean and hateful. And I think that will come across quite strongly. I mean, I notice I personally have an almost visceral reaction to the niceness of Governor Walz doing an extended discussion about how homeowners need to clean the gutters of their houses more, as opposed to the nasty racism of the junior senator from Ohio suggesting that Haitian Americans are a danger to us all. And I actually think that's what's going to be the story of the vice presidential debate, much less than the policy barbs they will be priming for. And I think that will be beneficial to Vice President Harris's campaign.
Ed, that's a kind of an interesting prospect. We have Tim Walz, and he'll be like doing that kind of folksy thing that he does, and he'll be going, look, let me give you some tips to replace your carburetor. And, it has to be 3 turns of the screw to the left and past dead even or whatever was said in My Cousin Vinny. And then at the end, he'll say something like, and then he'll just drop a little line in for J.D. Vance, like, is it true you dated your whole living room set?
And that's why they're standing up, by the way. J.D. Vance can't be seen on a sofa.
Yeah, that's true. That's right. There was no couch in America that would be seen with J.D. Vance.
It's the same reason that Walz is, won't have a cheerleader on his arm. It just doesn't want to get distracted. The other issue that will come up, I predict, because of recent sort of signals, not just from Vance, but from all the most robust pro-Trumpian senators, the Rubios, the Cruzes, the Hawleys, the Cottons, is Walz's spell of teaching in China in 1989-90, and the fact he then took classes from his middle school in Minnesota to China on something like 25, 30 occasions. And Rubio said this proves the fact that he taught there, Tim Walz, in the late 80s. This proves how sophisticated China is in grooming future American leaders. The fact that is just outrageously sophomoric politics, I mean, just really poor, will not put J.D. Vance off from trying it on. I do predict that trope will be tried next Tuesday. I think the Ukraine thing will come up in passing, and Vance is kind of a sort of right-wing version of a less sophisticated Noam Chomsky. That essentially anything America does is bad. It's still
very insulting to Noam Chomsky.
Yeah, well, Chomsky basically thinks that everything that went wrong in the world originated in America.
Well, he's still, first of all, Noam Chomsky's still alive. And secondly, he's recovering from a stroke. So, give the guy cut him some slack here.
Who, J.D. Chomsky? Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. That it's just taken a little bit of time for me to acclimatize to the fact that, I don't want to be unfair to Chomsky. He's a brilliant man. But the fact that Vance and the right now sound like the tankiest of tanky left. It's that horseshoe thing that the far left and the far right meet.
Yeah, but I have to tell you something. The far left, maybe in 1935, had a little bit of a kind of red or pink tinge to them. They never embraced Russia the way the way that Trump and Vance do. I mean, they're just spewing Kremlin talking points.
They are
on this issue.
They absolutely are, and Elon Musk is then rocket boosting those talking points to his 197 million followers. But broadly speaking, Walz is a nicer guy. That's all Americans will remember, and I don't think the debate will be distinguished in American history as changing the race or impacting it in any way.
So I'm getting a little impatient here, Rosa. There's this debate. There's not going to be another debate. This debate is clearly going to be incredibly boring. Then there's going to be nothing. That's October 1st. Then we have to get to November 5th. And there's no other debates. There's no other anything. Can't we just get this over with? I mean, what's going to happen in that month? Or is there going to be a surprise?
Well,
do you expect a big October surprise? And what is it going to be? And does it involve Mu Deng, the tiny hippopotamus that everybody seems to love?
Well, it's going to be over in some ways. It's already in the process of being over. Voting has started in some places already. So there's good news or bad news, depending on your point of view. For some voters, they're already casting their ballots, and they now will just turn off the television and check out for the next 6 weeks because they're done. But that's part of what has scrambled everything. I very much think that the expansion of access to the polls by making mail-in ballots easier is a good thing, but it certainly has made it even harder. It's made it harder for one of the many things. It's made polling harder and to understand whether polls have any validity anymore. But it's another thing that is driving, I think, enabled the GOP to falsely claim that there's more uncertainty than in fact there is about the process itself and the integrity of the process. But anyway, that's not really your question. Your real question, I think, is, my God, how do we bear this? How are we going to survive until November? And what the heck is going to happen? It's going to be a really long 6 weeks. It's going to be an agonizingly long 6 weeks. It's probably going to be more than that, because by the time all of the votes have in fact been counted and we have a definitive result, my guess is it will be at least a week after Election Day. And I actually think it is important for everyone to keep repeating that to every opportunity they get, that Americans should not necessarily expect that there will be a clear outcome, at 2 a.m. after Election Day. It's probably going to drag on because of all those mail-in ballots and absentee ballots and so forth. Given the uncertainties of the polling, given what a nail biter this has been, given how rapidly things have changed rapidly in U.S. terms, since we know that other countries seem to manage to hold elections faster, somewhat more expeditiously than we do, everything is going to surprise me. Anything is going to surprise me. I have no idea what to expect. I think Kamala Harris could win by a landslide. I think Donald Trump could win by a landslide. I think it could be, tight, and it could drag on for months and months, and it could be absolutely horrible with a combination of legal wrangling, lies, disinformation coming from the Trump team, and potentially the potential for real civil violence. Any of those things could happen. So in that sense, either nothing will surprise me or everything will surprise me. I think there is still significant potential. We talked about this recently when we had Renee DiResta on. We have significant potential for some sort of social media or internet fueled aggressive disinformation campaign, whether it started by an adversarial foreign power or just by domestic mischief makers, that could radically upend everything we think we know right now. So I don't think we know anything, basically.
I'm feeling that. We've got 2 minutes left. Each one of you guys may offer an additional October surprise so people can bet on them in online betting forums.
I'm opposed to online betting forums, so I will just say Rosa is exactly right.
Oh my gosh. It's true, though. She probably is exactly right. Ed, do you have some expectation that we're not aware of here, that something is going to come from out of the blue?
Sorry, did you ask that to me? Because my screen froze for 20 seconds.
Yes, I did ask that to you, Ed.
Okay, something unexpected happening in October?
Yeah.
Yes, we should expect the unexpected. I mean, by definition, black swans cannot be predicted, so I would be cancelling my point by predicting one. But I think there are lots of potential things that could change the nature of this election. The one that people keep telling me is on the sort of threat horizon, but I sort of find it quite hackneyed and don't tend to believe these things, is some kind of a terrorist event involving somebody who's crossed the American border. I mean, that would obviously be dreadful in and of itself, but a nasty surprise for the Harris campaign if it involved a border, somebody who had crossed into America illegally. But goodness knows, black swans are unexpected.
Yeah, I don't refer to them as black swans.
The elimination of Shohei Ohtani's Los Angeles Dodgers and a Subway series between the Mets and the Yankees.
That would be interesting. That would occupy a lot of attention. I happen to have a Shohei Ohtani Hokkaido Nippon Ham Fighters jersey in my closet that I have been preparing to wear for the World Series, and now I'm afraid I may not get to it. And I do not use the term black swans because I once was engaged in an exchange with Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who was one of the biggest assholes I've ever been exposed to. And so I boycott the term. And of course, the single biggest black swan that could change October and would be the least likely thing possible to happen would be for me finally to get through the whole month without carbs. I will report back on that as we make our way through the month. We will continue these discussions, but until then, you guys are the best. Thank you, Rosa. Thank you, Kori. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, all you nerds out there, for listening to this kind of stuff and making. Last week Deep State Radio was the number 3 or number 2 government podcast of all government podcasts. Because we don't, they're political podcasts, but we're about government. You know why? Because the election will be over at some point. And we've been doing this long enough to know that getting overheated about politics all the time is not sustainable. And that's why we have you guys who will be overheated no matter what happens anywhere in the world. But until we switch topics, we'll be talking about this one. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.